So the first tip we're going to give you today is about intonation. Susmita has been telling me that many students have said to her that they don't always know when a professor is asking them a question. They can't always follow when the professor is changing from one mode to another. Well, why is that so? Why are they having trouble? Well, if you remember something that Susmita also told you when she was talking about Indian English, is that the accent is quite different, and part of the accent is the melody of English. And the reason why it's different is the influence from the student's mother tongue. So let's talk a little bit about cues that we can use to help students understand our intent. But let's start by talking a little bit about how we use intonation in Canadian English. There is a basic pattern that we use. There's lots of room for variation, but there is a basic pattern. What we tend to do is we use, if these were 5 pitches, we tend to use 3 main pitches. We tend to stay up on one line as we talk, and then when we're almost finished a thought, we'll go up, and then we'll go down at the very end of the thought. That means that that's the clue that as you go up, that you've reached the most important part of the thought, and this is the clue that the thought is finished. The other thing we do, if we want to show that it's an unfinished thought, or if you want a yes or no answer, is we tend to go on the same line and then up, and then stay going up until sort of the top of that pitch. And that is the clue, or the cue, that we are asking a yes or no question. Or, I'm not finished yet, wait till my next thought. Okay, so what can we do to help students with cues? One thing we can do is to vary this pitch. Normally this higher pitch, we only use it if we're really excited. Or this lower pitch, we only use it if we're kind of angry. We tend to stay in these 3. However, if it, and just to keep a longer lecture a little more interesting, but to use your voice as a cue of when you're changing your modes or changing your purpose of talking, just vary that pitch a little bit. Maybe go a little higher than you usually do, or maybe a little lower to show that the thought is finished. Okay, so that is tip number 1. Vary your pitch, especially when you're asking a question. The second cue I would give you is tied to this, and that is use pausing. And so you can pause at the end of a sentence, possibly pause just before you ask a question, pause at the end of the sentence to get people's attention. But you can also pause in the middle of a sentence and chunk things into thoughts. So for example, I might say, nice day, isn't it? So I pause a little bit between those two, and I would go, nice day, down like this, and then, isn't it, for the tag question. The little pause helps people have time to process. Or if I'm at the end of explaining something or telling students a piece of information, I might ask them, pause, can you tell me why this is so? So a little bit of a pause before I ask this question, and you'll notice I said, can you tell me why this is so? I've almost broken it into two thought groups. Can you tell me, a little bit up, why this is so? And then down at the end. Okay? So using varying pitch and pausing. The third cue is actually to use cues. Or sorry, the third tip is to use cues. How do you do that? Well, what I tend to do is be really explicit about it. So if I'm talking with a group of students and I want to ask a question, I'll stop and I'll say, question. Well, there is no doubting my intent. I'm about to ask a question. If you want to be a little more sophisticated about it, you could say, I'd like to ask you a question. Or, please tell me. Or you could say something like, here's a question. So, good tip, use cues that prepare students for what's coming. Fourth tip. Use gestures. For example, Susmita, Could you tell me how many main pitches do we use when we're talking?
3.
You're right, we use 3. So you'll notice palm up gesture inviting Susmita to ask me the question. And she has that visual cue that I'm expecting an interaction. So there you have it. You have 4 suggestions for helping your students to better follow the lecture and know when they're being addressed and when they're expected to participate. Vary your pitch, pause, use cues, and use gestures.